Section 50 of L'Assommoir. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Lazarus. L'Assommoir by Emile Zola. Translated by Ernest A. Visitelli. Second part of Chapter 11. Nana took up the stems of some violets she was rolling, and the whole workroom turned its attention to the man in question. He was a well-dressed individual wearing a frock-coat, and he looked about 50 years old. He had a pale face, very serious and dignified in expression, framed round with a well-trimmed grey beard. He remained for an hour in front of the herbalist's shop, with his eyes fixed on the Venetian blinds of the workroom. The flower girls indulged in little bursts of laughter, which died away amidst the noise of the street, and while leaning forward, to all appearance busy with their work, they glanced askance so as not to lose sight of the gentleman. "Ah," remarked Leonie, "he wears glasses. He's a swell. He's waiting for Augustine, no doubt." But Augustine, a tall, ugly, fair-haired girl, sourly answered that she did not like old men, whereupon Madame Lerat jerked her head, answered with a smile full of underhand meaning, "That is a great mistake on your part, my dear. The old ones are more affectionate." At this moment Leonie's neighbor, a plump little body, whispered something in her ear, and Leonie suddenly threw herself back on her chair, seized with a fit of noisy laughter, wriggling, looking at the gentleman, and then laughing all the louder. "That's it, oh, that's it," she stammered. "How dirty that Sophie is!" "What did she say? What did she say?" asked the whole workroom, aglow with curiosity. Leonie wiped the tears from her eyes without answering. Then she became somewhat calmer. She began curling her flowers again and declared, "It can't be repeated." The others insisted, but she shook her head, seized again with a gust of gaiety. Thereupon Augustine, her left-hand neighbor, besought her to whisper it to her, and finally Leonie consented to do so, with her lips close to Augustine's ear. Augustine threw herself back and wriggled with convulsive laughter in her turn. Then she repeated the phrase to a girl next to her, and from ear to ear it travelled round the room amid exclamations and stifled laughter. When they were all of them acquainted with Sophie's disgusting remark, they looked at one another and burst out laughing together, although a little flushed and confused. Madame Lerat alone was not in the secret, and she felt extremely vexed. "That's very impolite behavior on your part, young ladies," said she. "It is not right to whisper when other people are present. Something indecent, no doubt. Ah, that's becoming." She did not dare go so far as to ask them to pass Sophie's remark on to her, although she burned to hear it. So she kept her eyes on her work, amusing herself by listening to the conversation. Now no one could make even an innocent remark without the others twisting it around and connecting it with the gentleman on the sidewalk. Madame Lerat herself once sent them into convulsions of laughter when she said, "Mademoiselle Lisa, my fire's gone out. Pass me yours." "Oh, Madame Lerat's fire's gone out," laughed the whole shop. They refused to listen to any explanation, but maintained they were going to call in the gentleman outside to rekindle Madame Lerat's fire. However, the gentleman over the way had gone off. The room grew calmer, and the work was carried on in the sultry heat. When 12 o'clock struck, mealtime, they all shook themselves. Nana, who had hastened to the window again, volunteered to do the errands if they liked, and Leonie ordered 2 sous worth of shrimps. Augustine a screw of fried potatoes, Lisa a bunch of radishes, Sophie a sausage. Then, as Nana was going down the stairs, Madame Lerat, who found her partiality for the window that morning rather curious, overtook her with long legs. "Wait a bit," said she, "I'll go with you. I want to buy something too." But in the passage below she perceived the gentleman, stuck there like a candle and exchanging glances with Nana. The girl flushed very red, whereupon her aunt at once caught her by the arm and made her trot over the pavement, whilst the individual followed behind. Ah, so the tomcat had come for Nana. Well, that was nice, at 15 years and a half, to have men trailing after her. Then Madame Lerat hastily began to question her. "Mon Dieu! Nana didn't know. He had only been following her for 5 days, but she could not poke her nose out of doors without stumbling on men. She believed he was in business. Yes, a manufacturer of bone buttons. Madame Lerat was greatly impressed. She turned around and glanced at the gentleman out of the corner of her eye. "One can see he's got a deep purse," she muttered. "Listen to me, kitten. You must tell me everything. You have nothing more to fear now." While speaking, they hastened from shop to shop, to the pork butcher's, the fruiterer's, the cook shop, and the errands in greasy paper were piled up in their hands. Still they remained amiable, flouncing along and casting bright glances behind them with gusts of gay laughter. Madame Lerat herself was acting the young girl on account of the button manufacturer, who was still following them. "He is very distinguished-looking," she declared, as they returned into the passage. "If he only has honourable views—" Then, as they were going up the stairs, she suddenly seemed to remember something. "By the way, tell me what the girls were whispering to each other. You know what Sophie said." Nana did not make any ceremony, only she caught Madame Lerat by the hand and caused her to descend a couple of steps, for really it wouldn't do to say it out loud, not even on the stairs. When she whispered it to her, it was so obscene that Madame Lerat could only shake her head, opening her eyes wide and pursing her lips. Well, at least her curiosity wasn't troubling her any longer. From that day forth, Madame Lerat regaled herself with her niece's first love adventure. She no longer left her, but accompanied her morning and evening, bringing her responsibility well to the fore. This somewhat annoyed Nana, but all the same she expanded with pride at seeing herself guarded like a treasure, and the talk she and her aunt indulged in the street with the button manufacturer behind them flattered her, and rather quickened her desire for new flirtations. Oh, her aunt understood the feelings of the heart. She even compassionated the button manufacturer, this elderly gentleman who looked so respectable. For, after all, sentimental feelings are more deeply rooted among people of a certain age. Still she watched. And yes, he would have to pass over her body before stealing her niece. One evening she approached the gentleman, and told him as straight as a bullet that his conduct was most improper. He bowed to her politely without answering, like an old satyr who was accustomed to hear parents tell him to go about his business. She really could not be cross with him. He was too well-mannered. Then came lectures on love, allusions to dirty blackguards of men, and all sorts of stories about hussies who had repented of flirtations, which left Nana in a state of pouting, with eyes gleaming brightly in her pale face. One day, however, in the Rue du Faubourg Poissonnière, the button manufacturer ventured to poke his nose between the aunt and the niece to whisper something which ought not to have been said. Whereupon Madame Lerat was so frightened that she declared she no longer felt able to handle the matter, and she told the whole business to her brother. Then came another row. There were some pretty rumpuses in the Coupeau's room. To begin with, the zinc worker gave Nana a hiding. What was that he learned? The hussy was flirting with old men. All right, only let her be caught philandering out of doors again, she'd be done for. Her father, would cut off her head in a jiffy. Had the like ever been seen before? A dirty nose who thought of beggaring the family. Thereupon he shook her, declaring in God's name that she'd have to walk straight, for he'd watch her himself in future. He now looked her over every night when she came in, even going so far as to sniff at her and make her turn round before him. One evening she got another hiding because he discovered a mark on her neck that he maintained was the mark of a kiss. Nana insisted it was a bruise that Leonie had given her when they were having a bit of a rough house. Yet at other times her father would tease her, saying she was certainly a choice morsel for men. Nana began to display the sullen submissiveness of a trapped animal. She was raging inside. "Why don't you leave her alone?" repeated Gervaise, who was more reasonable. "You will end up by making her wish to do it by talking to her about it so much." Ah, yes, indeed, she did wish to do it. She itched all over, longing to break loose and gad all the time, as Father Coupeau said. He insisted so much on the subject that even an honest girl would have fired up. Even when he was abusing her, he taught her a few things she did not know as yet, which, to say the least, was astonishing. Then, little by little, she acquired some singular habits. One morning he noticed her rummaging in a paper bag and rubbing something on her face. It was rice powder, which she plastered on her delicate satin-like skin with perverse taste. He caught up the paper bag and rubbed it over her face violently enough to graze her skin, and called her a miller's daughter. On another occasion she brought some ribbon home to do up her old black hat, which she was so ashamed of. He asked her in a furious voice where she had got those ribbons from. Had she earned them by lying on her back, or had she bagged them somewhere? A hussy or a thief, and perhaps both by now. More than once he found her with some pretty little doodad. She had found a little interlaced heart in the street on Rue d'Aboukir. Her father crushed the heart under his foot, driving her to the verge of throwing herself at him to ruin something of his. For 2 years she had been longing for one of those hearts, and now he had smashed it. This was too much. She was reaching the end of the line with him. Coupeau was often in the wrong in the manner in which he tried to rule Nana. His injustice exasperated her. She at last left off attending the workshop, and when the zinc worker gave her a hiding, she declared she would not return to Titreville again, for she was always placed next to Augustine, who must have swallowed her feet to have such a foul breath. Then Coupeau took her himself to the Rue de Caire, and requested the mistress of the establishment to place her always next to Augustine, by way of punishment. Every morning for a fortnight he took the trouble to come down from the Barrière Poissonnière to escort Nana to the door of the flower shop, and he remained for 5 minutes on the footway to make sure that she had gone in. But one morning, while he was drinking a glass with a friend in a wine shop in the Rue Saint-Denis, he perceived the hussy darting down the street. For a fortnight she had been deceiving him. Instead of going into the workroom, she climbed a story higher and sat down on the stairs, waiting till he had gone. When Coupeau began casting the blame on Madame Lerat, the latter flatly replied that she would not accept it. She had told her niece all she ought to tell her to keep her on her guard against men, and it was not her fault if the girl still had a liking for the nasty beasts. Now she washed her hands of the whole business. She swore she would not mix up in it, for she knew what she knew about scandal-mongers in her own family. Yes, certain persons who had the nerve to accuse her of going astray with Nana, and finding an indecent pleasure in watching her take her first misstep. Then Coupeau found out from the proprietress that Nana had been corrupted by that little floozy Leonie, who had given up flower-making to go on the street. Nana was being tempted by the jingle of cash and the lure of adventure on the streets. In the tenement in the Rue de la Goutte d'Or, Nana's old fellow was talked about as a gentleman everyone was acquainted with. Oh, he remained very polite, even a little timid, but awfully obstinate and patient, following her 10 paces behind like an obedient poodle. Sometimes, indeed, he ventured into the courtyard. One evening, Madame Gaudron met him in the second-floor landing, and he glided down alongside the balusters with his nose lowered, and looking as if on fire, but frightened. The Lorilleux threatened to move out if that wayward niece of theirs brought men trailing in after her. It was disgusting. The staircase was full of them. The Boches said that they felt sympathy for the old gentleman because he had fallen for a tramp. He was really a respectable businessman. They had seen his button factory on the Boulevard de la Villette. He would be an excellent catch for a decent girl. For the first month, Nana was greatly amused with her old flirt. You should have seen him always dogging her, a perfect great nuisance, who followed far behind in the crowd without seeming to do so. And his legs, regular lucifers. No more moss on his pate, only 4 straight hairs falling on his neck, so that she was always tempted to ask him where his hairdresser lived. What an old gaffer! He was comical, and no mistake, nothing to get excited over. Then, on finding him always behind her, she no longer thought him so funny. She became afraid of him, and would have called out if he had approached her. Often, when she stopped in front of a jeweller's shop, she heard him stammering something behind her, and what he said was true. She would have liked to have a cross with a velvet neckband, or a pair of coral earrings, so small you would have thought they were drops of blood. More and more, as she plodded through the mire of the streets, getting splashed by passing vehicles and being dazzled by the magnificence of the window displays, she felt longings that tortured her like hunger pangs. yearning for better clothes, for eating in restaurants, for going to the theatre, for a room of her own with nice furniture. Right at those moments, it never failed that her old gentleman would come up to whisper something in her ear. Oh, if only she wasn't afraid of him, how readily she would have taken up with him. When the winter arrived, life became impossible at home. Nana had her hiding every night. When her father was tired of beating her, her mother smacked her to teach her how to behave. And there were free-for-alls. As soon as one of them began to beat her, the other took her part, so that all three of them ended up by rolling on the floor in the midst of the broken crockery. And with all this, there were short rations, and they shivered with cold. Whenever the girl brought anything pretty, a bow or a pair of buttons, her parents confiscated the purchase and drank what they could get for it. She had nothing of her own, except her allowance of blows before coiling herself up between the rags of a sheet, where she shivered under her little black skirt, which she stretched out by way of a blanket. No, that cursed life could not continue. She was not going to leave her skin in it. Her father had long since ceased to count for her. When a father gets drunk like hers did, he isn't a father, but a dirty beast one longs to be rid of. And now, too, her mother was doing down the hill in her esteem. She drank as well. She liked to go and fetch her husband at Père Colombe's, so as to be treated, and she willingly sat down, with none of the air of disgust that she had assumed on the first occasion, draining glasses indeed at one gulp, dragging her elbows over the table for hours, and leaving the place with her eyes starting out of her head. End of second part of Chapter 11. Recording by David Lazarus.